Well, I think we're at the eve now, certainly, of the most impactful winter storm that we'll likely see in 25, 26. I certainly hope so. Just the widespread impacts from the cold air, which will be significant. A number of people will be impacted by very cold Arctic air. Obviously, the snowfall, we'll have to talk about that. That was been changing around, trending a bit. We knew that would happen here over the last 48 hours. And then the freezing rain potential, certainly perhaps the most significant damage from this event could certainly come from, the potential for an ice storm that we have to analyze here over the next 72 hours. I'm starting the video here today. This is a trend loop of 500 millibar vorticity. It's something we look at occasionally here to figure out, where these lows are going to be developing from. And the forecast that you're seeing here, so the loop is at the same time step in the forecast. It's actually for Saturday evening, kind of when the worst maybe of this storm will be occurring across portions of the Mid-South and the Mid-Atlantic. And the trend you're seeing is over the course of the last few days, how the model has updated the position of two troughs, which are really kind of steering the system. One here over Canada, you've seen that one jumping around quite a bit here just over the last few days as the forecasts get more and more recent here. You can see those trending on the top left, and then this other low to the southwest. Now, we kind of established this low over here in the southwest, let's call this like the Four Corners trough, as it came from the Pacific into this region here, would be the driver helping to pull up that warm, moist air over top of the cold air that has settled in here now at the latter part of this week here. And that's kind of really driving, Eric mentioned this yesterday, that overrunning event that we're going to see. But the main trend over the last 48 to 72 hours has really been this trough here. It starts out in the video kind of right here, and that trend, and by the end, here on January 22nd, the model is now analyzing that trough way over here by Montana. You can see that just at the end there, just replayed. So now the forecasts are getting more and more recent, and you'll see this trough shifting way over here by the latest forecast. What that's allowing to happen, it's allowing this Four Corners trough to consolidate, get a little bit stronger, and pull that much more warm air up into the system. And that has both shifted the rain and snow line further to the north, but it's also increased the impacts. As you bring up more moisture over that cold air, you're increasing the impacts with respect to how much snow we're going to get, how much freezing rain is possible. But all of those impacts shifted north a bit as a result of that. And you're seeing that here, just modeling the wind field here as we go into very early Saturday. You have that massive overrunning event. Look at all that moisture surging out of the Gulf, out of the Atlantic. That low, that trough up here by Montana taking its time is allowing all of this convergence to occur. You can see it even here over in the Eastern Pacific, across the Gulf, even moisture getting in here from the Atlantic into the Carolinas. Just a wide area of what we call moisture flux, a source for precipitation, thunder, freezing rain, and snow out of this. And that moisture flux has been improving as the model has gotten a better handle on how long this trough here off the west would be able to consolidate. Now, you push this much warm, moist air in January over very cold air temperatures, you're going to get a significant wintertime continental U.S. storm. It's somewhat pretty simple here, especially January 24th. And if we just look at the low temperatures valid for early Saturday morning, you have plenty of that cold air, a recipe for one of these big systems. Negative teens into the 20s up in North Dakota. That stretches into Minnesota, portions of northern Wisconsin. Talking about negative single digits across portions of the Midwest, getting into single digits near kind of the Ohio River Valley area. And then further to the south, even across Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, down through like Abilene, Midland, even into the teens or 20s. And really the only quote-unquote warmth is further across the absolute Gulf Coast under the influence of that return flow out of the Gulf Coast. And you can just see this sort of quote-unquote wintertime battle zone, if you will, across this region here, which is why you're going to see in the forecast a lot of the freezing rain concern kind of in this corridor here, where those freezing temperatures are settling in the morning on Saturday. And to the north of that, a pretty simple snow forecast for areas to the north, which no question at this point, looking at quite a bit of snow. You can see this too, just looking at the modeled temperatures. You can see leading up to this event tomorrow, you have plenty of source and transport of that cold air further to the south. You can see a little bit of convergence here over Texas, a low perhaps trying to develop there. And by the next day on Saturday, those winds turn around, at least on the southern periphery of this. See if I can play that forward if it'll load. And you start to move that air up out of the north, and you get precipitation kind of colliding with that colder air there. And we see this, the all hazards map here, valid as of this morning, incredibly colorful and widespread in terms of the advisories, watches, and warnings that have now been posted from the National Weather Service. The deep blue colors that you can see there across the upper Midwest, portions of the Northeast, even South Texas, those are extreme cold warnings and watches. We're concerned about the potential infrastructure impacts, just the cold in Texas, let alone the potential for freezing rain and heavy snow. Some of that potential outlined in the heavy winter storm warning that's now posted for portions of Oklahoma, the Red River, the South, and North Texas here. The kind of light blue color you can see there, a little bit grayer, that is a winter storm watch that's been posted for a significant chunk of the country, maybe a quarter of the land area of the continental U.S. under a winter storm watch at this point, likely to be upgraded to a warning in a number of areas here as we go through the next 48 hours. And then we can see just kind of in the white bolded counties here, those I believe are cold weather advisories, so not quite as cold as what we're expecting up in this quarter here. I mentioned those negative teens and the negative 20s for Minnesota, Minneapolis, northern Wisconsin. Nonetheless, still very cold air expected Friday morning and Saturday morning. We'll look at that kind of at the end of the forecast slideshow there. We're going to see this obviously fill in and start to look more pink across today. I believe we still see some of these stagnant air advisories across the west, but we're setting up for one of these big wintertime storm systems, and all the National Weather Service offices here can be busy trying to pinpoint the impacts to this. All right, it's hard to start anywhere with such a widespread storm system. Let's just start with the ECMWF modeled precipitation. I'll play this through the extent, and then we'll kind of dig into the specifics both locally and then by impact to the storm system. So to play this forward through today on Thursday, seeing some lake effect showers underway across Michigan, portions of Pennsylvania and New York. You can see just some showers here off the Front Range as this cold front dives further south down the central and southern plains here. As we go through the day Friday, we don't see too much precipitation across the southern plains until we get into Friday evening, and that's when we see the first kind of returns here around dinner time show up in the Red River and portions of central Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. That low coming out over the Pacific, even causing some showers here over Arizona, maybe as far as Southern California, maybe San Diego, seeing some showers there. But really you start to get into early Saturday, and that sleet and freezing rain potential starts to pick up here. Red River, the south, portions of Arkansas, I think northern Louisiana, can't even rule out some freezing rain there. And then heavy snow overspreading portions of Oklahoma, northern Arkansas, like Fayetteville, down through southern Missouri. We'll have to watch here, kind of over by the Texas Panhandle, see when that flips over as we go through the day Saturday. Remember I mentioned there's like an attempt to form that low here in South Texas, but even that kind of gets pushed out by all the cold air there. We're now through Saturday evening at dinner time, that freezing rain potential shifting off kind of toward the Memphis area. Heavier snow now settling in across the Ohio River area, certainly portions of Kentucky. Tennessee, seeing sleet and freezing rain potential there. One state where that snow has shifted north now, across the Ohio River, northern Kentucky. At this point, as we go through Saturday evening, late Saturday, you're seeing that freezing rain potential now pick up northeast Georgia, portions of South Carolina, North Carolina, even potentially some sleet now getting into Virginia. But what's making this event so impactful, look at the duration of it. All the way back across Texas, north central Texas, Arkansas, Memphis, areas that I mentioned 24 hours earlier seeing the impacts of this event are still under the influence of falling precipitation now. Some of it, sleet, some of it may be turning back over to freezing rain as this event unfolds. Snow now stretching all the way from Amarillo, probably transitioning over to snow at some point here Saturday night in Oklahoma City. Still snowing in southern Missouri, portions of southeast Kansas expecting heavy snow from this. Southern Illinois, southern Indiana, northern Kentucky, southern Ohio. I'm going to lose my breath mentioning every state here across the Mid-South and the Southeast. North Carolina, South Carolina seeing increased freezing rain potential, I think, as we go through Sunday morning. And then now seeing the system kind of wrap up into the Mid-Atlantic, Washington, D.C. metro area into the north, expecting very heavy snowfall there in excess perhaps of 6 inches, maybe more than 8. And this system finally pushes up and wraps up further north. This is much further north than where we had this, 48 hours ago. And now it's almost looking, like a nor'easter at this point here on Sunday evening, with heavy snow spreading across New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Providence, up into Boston. Starting to see snow pick up there. I'm not as convinced at this point that this backside freezing rain is going to form here, at least as this model. I do think we'll see freezing rain in this area by this time Sunday evening, likely turning over to snow or sleet at this point. Late through Sunday night into Monday, still seeing potential for icing here across North Carolina, southern Virginia. I do think a lot of this is coming down as sleet, not necessarily freezing rain, but we'll have to look at that in just a second to see where that might pick up. And then still seeing now heavy snow unfolding across New England here as we go through late Sunday evening into very early Monday morning. with potentially heavy snow across Boston, certainly the interior Massachusetts, New England, and Maine at this point. And by the time we get through Monday, the extent of the storm now off the eastern seaboard at this point through Monday evening. So a multi-day storm, a lot of impacts, a lot of states that are going to be impacted for more than 24 hours with respect to at least precipitation, likely changing in precipitation type, potentially multiple times as we go through the day. So that's kind of the big picture. I do want to dive into it. We do have the NAM forecast. It only goes out 60 hours, but we're starting to see that now, at least through early Saturday at this point where I'm recording this video. Play this forward, you start to see rain showers pick up across portions of Texas here tomorrow evening. Even some snow. I mentioned those light showers coming down the Front Range, western Nebraska, western Kansas, and Oklahoma. As that low consolidates, we start to see that potential for freezing rain and sleet, so potentially across North Texas. Some freezing rain potential there, at least briefly, more so sleet across Oklahoma Friday night. Transitioning over to heavy snow at some point here, between that line between Tulsa and Oklahoma City there along the interstate, with heavier snow on the northern side of the state and up into Kansas as we go through late Friday night. Still seeing freezing rain potential through East Texas, but it's at a narrow corridor here, even over to West Texas, at least from the 3-kilometer NAM. And we'll have to see how much that in purple gets all the way to the ground and is able to freeze and stick around and cause issues. But there is that potential here overnight Friday into early Saturday morning, potentially impacting some travel early Saturday. I'll have to keep an eye on this. Sleet further to the northeast across Arkansas, Oklahoma, kind of the Texarkana area, and then heavy snow now getting into northern Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, southern Missouri, certainly southeast Kansas as we go through early Saturday, and that continues to spread east. The second freezing rain area of concern, northern Louisiana, central and northern Mississippi. This is going to be a corridor we're going to have to watch. And then through Memphis, looking like more sleet, mixed precipitation event with perhaps less freezing rain potential as we go through the day on Saturday. But you can see that corridor that we were worried about for freezing rain kind of right in here. Heavier snow and sleet off to the north of that, and then highly questionable snowfall totals in between, where some of this is going to be coming down in snow, some of it kind of as those icy pellets, if you will. As we go further toward the east, we lose that NAM forecast at that lead time, but I'm going to take this forecast further. Take this in through Saturday evening. See that snowfall spreading across Kentucky at this point and through southern Indiana and Ohio as we go through Saturday evening. Freezing rain potential, again, starting to pick up somewhere here in the Carolinas, northeast Georgia as we go through Saturday night. I think Tennessee, southeast Kentucky seeing more sleet out of the system, kind of mixed precipitation, and then still watching that freezing rain potential even through Saturday night across northern Louisiana, southeastern Arkansas, western Mississippi. At this point, going through late Saturday into early Sunday, that's when we're really expecting that mid-Atlantic snow to pick up in a heavy way across Maryland, southern Pennsylvania, even New Jersey, portions of West Virginia seeing that as well, including in some ice there as you go further south. Transitioning back over to full-on rain at some point here over Tennessee, kind of on the windward side of the Appalachians, sort of the opposite of that cold air damming effect that's keeping that ice potential persisting through Sunday morning in the Carolinas. And then the storm system wraps up later, late Sunday, still seeing that icing potential across North Carolina and Virginia. And then the heavier snow now, as I mentioned, moving through New England after that. If we look at the wide snow swath here, this is just from the ECMWF. You start to get in the purple and pink colors here. That's when you start to exceed, 8, getting up toward 10 to 12 inches. So you can see the area of heaviest snow that's expected out of this, kind of through this corridor here. Certainly southern Missouri, which I mentioned multiple times, northern Arkansas, southeast Kansas, northern Oklahoma, but this transition region, the have and have nots somewhere around here, across central Kentucky, north of Memphis, and somewhere north, unfortunately, of Little Rock, which the storm has shifted further away from that city as we've gone through the cycle here. So in the mid-Atlantic, seeing very high values out of this. Much of the state of Pennsylvania now forecasted to receive more than 6 inches of snow. I will say this is just the snow forecast total from the ECMWF forecast, which is notoriously finicky in terms of getting these amounts perfect. And what we really are looking for here is just that extent of the heaviest snow, just the exact kind of geography of where we should expect some of that to fall, but the exact amounts we can't pick up straight off this chart. Certainly not 48 to 72 hours in advance. We can look over at a different model called positive snow depth change that accounts for kind of how it accumulates, and we'll see that kind of trim these values somewhat here, keeping a better focus on southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, as Oklahoma is expecting some of that sleet to mix in there, You can see the Mid-Atlantic and New England values certainly up over that 6 to 8 inches. Sometimes what I do with snowfall like this on maps, I take off 4 inches or so to account for some of that uncertainty. So while we see a wide swath here between 8 to 13 inches, maybe we should expect in this corridor here something closer to like 5 to 9, with the potential for greater amounts here in the Appalachians and like the Blue Ridge in Western Virginia. If we look at the GFS and we do the same kind of positive snow depth change from the GFS, you're seeing ridiculous snowfall values. These we can discount rather significantly because it's at least in this calculation, including all of that freezing rain and sleet as snow. And you can't do that. Obviously, if you multiply those values by 10, you're going to get values up by 20. So that's why you're seeing like southern Arkansas, Little Rock, northern Mississippi getting like 1.5 foot of snow if we look at the GFS. So unfortunately, anything north of like this line, we have to discount. But nonetheless, the GFS still north of that line. We can take a little bit more verbatim, if you will, and you can see the higher potential for heavier snow in that area that we mentioned there. I don't think we're going to get 15 inches of snow near Joplin, but potentially, you could get closer to 8 to 10. And we'll have to keep an eye on that potential as we go through the next 3 to 4 days here. We shift that over to the east. You can see the Ohio River, which I mentioned, seeing values getting close to that foot line. Again, I think that's probably more 7 to 8. But you get over in the Mid-Atlantic, certainly this area could see a foot or more. And then this area across Pennsylvania up through New England, looking at anywhere between like 4 to 8 inches. And the metro areas always get a little bit less, just the proximity to the Atlantic warmth there. So trimming off a few inches there, but certainly snowy days ahead for New York, Boston, certainly DC, looking at 6 to 8 inches plus, I would think at this point. And again, shifting over to the GFS, it's including all of that icing here across the Carolinas, Northeast Georgia as snow. You can't do that. A lot of this, unfortunately, falling as rain or ice and not accumulating snow, despite the forecast from the GFS showing 2 feet of snow for Northeast Georgia at this point. A sort of simpler way to look at this, just look at the WPC, probability of exceeding 8 inches of rain. So you get into the blue colors, that's above 50% chances. And we can see areas that we've kind of already harped on: southeast Kansas, northern Oklahoma, southwest Missouri, northern Arkansas, the Ohio River. Probability is approaching 70% of exceeding 8 inches, and then kind of the DC metro area and west over the higher elevation having a higher probability as well. This extends likely maybe a little bit up into New England and across Pennsylvania, but this ends at 72 hours. So it's not accounting for that Sunday precipitation, which is going to fall across this corridor here. I think question marks, I don't know if we'll get quite to 8 across New York City and Boston specifically, given they're a little bit further east. But nonetheless, some heavier snowfall coming to those cities there, including Connecticut and perhaps a little bit of Providence as well. Big picture, looking at the freezing rain potential. Again, the ECMWF is going to highlight some of that sleet as freezing rain, so we can't take into account it's not going to freezing rain across every area where we see it accumulating here, but there are some areas that I'm kind of hyper-focused on. One here, let's call it the kind of Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi risk, and one here across the Carolinas kind of 24 hours later. And as I poke around some of the forecast soundings from these sites here, I'll do that just from the GFS because we can get those forecast soundings there. If we look early Saturday, we mentioned some of that travel issue early Saturday in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. So we're looking at these atmospheric soundings. That gives us a temperature profile vertically through the atmosphere. So we're coming quite literally down vertically through the atmosphere here. And we're actually warming up in the kind of low to mid levels where we're above freezing. That's the dotted line here. We call the 0 degrees Celsius isotherm, that line. So if our temperatures are to the right of that, they're warmer in the mid to lower levels of the atmosphere. So any precipitation falling is going to melt, fall as rain, and then at the last little bit here, maybe the last 2,000 or 3,000 feet, is going to head in back toward freezing air here over the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. That sets up the potential for that freezing rain. Now, this isn't kind of your textbook freezing rain sounding, so to speak, because I'd like, if I want to form freezing rain, which I don't, but just in that sense, I'd like this to be a little bit colder, to more consistently super cool that water so it freezes on impact to the ground. Plus, at 30 degrees Fahrenheit, it takes a surge of warmth out of the north to push that to 31 to 32. Now you're question mark whether even freezing that rain as it falls through that last layer at all. So there is potential here, certainly in the morning for freezing rain, but I think it's a little bit uncertainty with respect to the degree of it across central and north Texas as we go late Friday and early Saturday morning. You shift further to the north across areas like Arkansas, southeastern Oklahoma, northeast Texas, And you melt that layer coming down through the low levels, but you're actually too cold in the lowest levels of the atmosphere, all the way down to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. And plus that, you're getting into that negative air, higher up. So this is going to almost certainly freeze back as sleet before it makes contact with the ground. I'm shifting now further to the east over Louisiana, and this is a little bit more conducive to freezing rain. You have a nice warm layer here, certainly melting those snowflakes entirely as they come down out of the cold air aloft. You're getting all the way down now to 28 degrees Fahrenheit, if not 26 or 27 just off the surface, and that's enough to freeze that water on impact, I would think, at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Why I'm a little bit more worried about this corridor here in Louisiana, West Mississippi for freezing rain maybe than some other areas locally. If I shift up into central Mississippi, again, you can see that kind of similar, getting a little bit colder now, 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit, setting up better chances. Maybe it's like Winona there in central Mississippi for freezing rain there. Heading further east through this event, if I go over into South Carolina, right on the Georgia border, again, you can see that nice 26 to 28 degree Fahrenheit, nice melting layer here. This one may be a little bit too steep, and what I mean by that is, that's a pretty thick freezing layer to fall through, such that you have some potential for sleet here. But again, the soundings over into the east, like up into the Carolinas late Saturday night. This is now even through portions of Sunday evening, all the way down to 24 Fahrenheit, but these soundings look a little bit better too for freezing rain, which is why those two areas kind of stand out to me, at least initially. WPC kind of highlighting those areas as well. This only takes us out 72 hours, so one corridor in here for the probability, up to 60 to 70% of exceeding half an inch of icing, which is where you can really get into those larger impacts. You want kind of a more catastrophic ice storm, you're looking at an inch plus. We don't want that, but unfortunately, with the potential for that, approaching 40% here, somewhere near the Mississippi River as we go through the day on early Saturday. If we take this, 72 hours out, this ends Sunday morning, but some of that icing that we saw across the Carolinas, unfortunately, was occurring later in the day on Sunday, so this probabilities aren't accounting for that yet, but I would expect these probabilities to inch further to the east, unfortunately, with lesser chances, in between or over here in Texas or to the north of that, over Virginia, where much of this likely falling as sleet. All right, kind of the last large impact, I think, from the system. We talked about the snow, talked about the freezing rain as the cold air by Friday morning. Extreme cold, even for the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, getting down to the negative 20s. I don't think we're at record territory here, but still very, very cold with temperature anomalies, approaching negative 25 below normal, even for late January. That's going to be cold. That expands further across Texas on Saturday morning and across Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So much colder temperatures now into Michigan, portions of northern Ohio, all down into the negative single digits. If we take this out to Sunday, look at Texas now across Amarillo, down through the southwest, Midland, Odessa, San Antonio down toward 22 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 across Houston. I mean, a significant blast of cold air across the state of Texas on Sunday morning behind this system, and that only entrenches itself on Monday across Arkansas. Look at Memphis, negative 1 degree Fahrenheit low Monday morning. And Memphis. A lot of this is going to depend on which areas have that heavy snowpack, because that snowpack can help the temperatures drop even further in this area here, and you're going to see these values likely end up a little bit different than where they look right now. Depending on that, by Tuesday morning, still seeing that cold air settled in across Texas, still looking at teens across the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, still looking at 0 degrees Fahrenheit Tuesday morning in Memphis. Much of Kentucky under the influence of that heavy snow now, and the negatives, if not single digits there. And even in the Carolinas, man, this is just very cold air all the way down to the Gulf Coast, 20s, stretching essentially across the entire Gulf Coast until you reach like Tampa. And that persists on Wednesday before warming up and moderating just a little bit. This is an impressive shot of cold air. As a result, we've seen a tremendous rally in natural gas prices just over the last week, up some 36%, 37% over the last month. Would expect some sort of variability to continue here today. Don't ask me which way it's going to go, but certainly natural gas markets responding to the cold air, kind of shaving off the entirety of the lack of gains here over the last month or two. I want to take this forecast a little bit further out, at least from the ECMWF here. Eric mentioned that shortwave trough kind of mid next week. We take that Monday to Wednesday. That really just more of a lake effect snow event, maybe some showers through New England. But what we're really watching, if we go through Thursday into Friday, we get another piece of it here And I'm not going to break it down into the specifics right now because we're 10 days out in the forecast. But we are seeing the potential for another storm across either the mid-Atlantic, the southeast, or nor'easter, maybe late next week, with the trough Eric mentioned maybe splitting and slowing down a bit. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that late next week. Don't take this forecast verbatim. I'm not saying Atlanta is going to get snow late next week. I'm not saying we're going to get snow, down toward the Gulf Coast and South Carolina to the northeast of that. But it is something we'll have to keep an eye on. The GFS, let's see if I have that pulled up. Take that out through next week, Tuesday, Wednesday. You can see that initial system coming through Wednesday, Thursday through the northeast with some snow showers. And then the GFS has some system trying to wrap up down there as well. So just something to keep an eye on for now. But like we saw with this last system, this could jump around significantly, certainly 10 plus days out at this point that I don't want to put too much weight into it. After that, we're seeing this trend toward drier conditions over this exact same area, despite all of the precipitation expected in this corridor here. The west, unfortunately, there was some hint that we could go back over wetter in California. Even some models that came out over the last 48 hours were trying to hint at that, but the models have flipped back, at least for the state of California, maybe less wet than they were. Still seeing some values pick up here from the ECMWF ensemble for more rainfall anomalies later in the cycle, at least for the Pacific Northwest, which has gone over drier, obviously, over the last 2 weeks. So keeping an eye on that as we approach the first week of February. Drier to the east of that, and temperatures playing out nicely with that jet coming in like this and diving back down. We're seeing warmth spread back across the Canadian prairie, which has been socked into some extreme cold at times this year. A turnaround in temperatures early in February for areas that are going to be very cold, obviously, here over this weekend, but staying cold across the southeast and the eastern U.S. This is an area that has been cold here this winter, especially of late, and obviously in the forecast with those freezing temperatures reaching the Gulf Coast again. Unfortunately, through the long range, day 10 through 15, the potential for colder air here persists. But once we lock out some of that Arctic air in early February, late January, it's going to prevent kind of those deep Arctic blasts from getting all the way through there. But at least with respect to typical average early February temperatures, likely to be below that across the eastern U.S. To start out the month of February. Last thing I want to mention here, a little bit more on the long range. I mentioned a lot on the short range, obviously, with the major winter storm approaching here early. The only thing I'll say with respect to the long range is we have talked kind of this month about this westerly wind burst, these red colors here stretching into the western and central Pacific. And we're seeing that here now play out. In fact, the winds here starting to shift around in the central Pacific. And we kind of mentioned that this was the first big hint that we might be ending La Nina and heading toward El Nino potentially. But curiously, the forecasts haven't persisted that too far through the central Pacific. At least the potential for a Kelvin wave here not as strong. And we've returned, at least in the forecast here, as we get closer toward February, to easterlies in the central west Pacific, and how that might push some of the showers back toward the MJO phases 4 and 5. So we're going to have to see that potential, and if it plays out, I want to look at the upper level divergence here as we go further out. And yeah, sure enough, see some of that sinking air back over the central Pacific when those easterlies pick up, and we see thunderstorm activity rising back over the maritime continent here. And this says to me that La Nina may be making a last little push here, and we're seeing a bit of a battle here between what looks like the end of it and La Nina trying to hang on here. So gonna have to see how that plays out. That would potentially weaken or slow down the development of an El Nino at least through February or March. And that's relevant, I think, to our spring and summer forecasts. We're going to have to see how these wind bursts play out in this kind of battle zone, if you will, across the Central Pacific over the next kind of 3 to 4 weeks. But at least right now, seeing a resurgence here of some La Nina-like conditions, at least briefly. I'll end it there today. Again, stay safe as we go through this weekend. That freezing rain potential may be my greatest concern, but with respect to infrastructure, natural gas, obviously, those temperatures, a significant concern, and then the heavy snow across a wide area, Oklahoma, southeast Kansas, obviously through southern Missouri, southern Illinois, northern Kentucky, and then up into the mid-Atlantic and New England as well. So a lot of different impacts and the necessity then to stay safe as a result of that.